I'm Tom Gallagher, and I serve as the moderator today. I'm the CEO of the Religion News Foundation and the CEO and publisher of the Foundation's subsidiary, the Religion News Service. I want to welcome you this morning to the discussion of the 2017 annual report from the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, also known as USCIRF. USCIRF was created in 1998 by the 1998 Interreligious Freedom Act. This is USCIRF's 18th report and heading into their second decade next year. And I look forward to wishing you a happy 20th anniversary next year. We'd like to welcome members of the media, our friends from NGOs and from Capitol Hill and elsewhere. You have the biographies of the panelists at your seats, and I'd like to give a brief introduction of each. So in the middle of the panel table, we have Father Tom Reese, the USCIRF chair. Next to him, on his left, is Vice Chairman Daniel Mark, and then the commissioners Sandra Jolly, Christina Arriaga, Jackie Wolcott, John Ruskay, and Cliff May. On the phone from California, in the middle of grading exams, we have Tenzin Dorji. So just before we get started, just a couple housekeeping notes. One is we ask you turn your cell phones off. As you can see, this event is being videotaped and will be made public on the USCIRF website later today. And so this is an event that's completely on the record, so keep that in mind. Later, after the presentation, we'll have time for questions, and we have microphones that will be brought to each questioner. We ask you that you state your name and your organization, and then if you can, direct a question to a specific commissioner. So now we'll have some brief remarks from Father Tom Reese and then the Vice Chairman about the annual report, and then we'll have comments from each of the commissioners about the report and other specific work. And also we're going to have a short description of a very important new USCIRF project in support of religious prisoners of conscience. This was just rolled out in the last month or so. USCIRF has always been about not just giving a voice to the persecuted and the voiceless, but now they're giving them a face and a name. And only by such advocacy, which is personal, organizational, and sustained, can USCIRF and all of us hope to improve the lot of these prisoners who are in our thoughts and prayers daily. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Father Tom.
Thank you, Tom. And good morning, everyone, and thank you for coming. I'm Father Thomas Reese, chair of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom. For those of you who don't know USCIRF, we're an independent, bipartisan U.S. federal government commission, the first of its kind in the world. We review the facts and circumstances of violations of the universal right to freedom of religion or belief. And we do that outside the United States. And we also make policy recommendations to the President, the Secretary of State, and the Congress. USCIRF has 9 commissioners appointed by the President and the congressional leadership of both parties. Our work is bipartisan. But let me stress that we are not the State Department. USCIRF does not make U.S. government policy. We make policy recommendations. And yes, the State Department also has an annual report on religious freedom, but that is different from ours. Since I've mentioned the State Department, let me say that all of us at USCIRF hope that the President soon appoints a well-qualified and experienced ambassador at large for international religious freedom. This is a vital position, and the U.S. should stay at the forefront of this issue. I hope a strong candidate is quickly nominated and confirmed. USCIRF's report this year covers more than 35 countries. You can see the full report and all our countries at our website, www.uscirf.gov. And actually, the report is also in a number of different languages. We try and have it in the language of the country that we are reporting on also. Our report covers three basic groups of countries. First, there are the countries of particular concern, CPCs. Those countries that engage in or tolerate systematic, ongoing, and egregious religious freedom abuses. Second, we have tier 2, a tier 2 list of countries that have serious religious freedom violations, but those violations do not rise to the CPC level. And finally, we have other countries and regions that we monitor. These can be countries that have been either CPCs or tier 2s, or simply countries that USCIRF saw, in which USCIRF saw emerging issues or troubling trends that didn't rise to the CPC or tier 2 level, but which we wanted to keep an eye on. We are required under the International Religious Freedom Act to issue a report each year with recommendations to the President, the Secretary of State, and Congress. A key component of this report is our recommendation as to what countries deserve being designated CPCs when it comes to religious freedom violations. CPCs, countries of particular concern, represent the worst of the worst when it comes to religious oppression. But I want to stress that it is not just what a government is actively doing. Governments are also responsible for tolerating abusive behavior against religious freedom, whether or not these abuses are actually conducted by those governments. This year, USCIRF recommends that the U.S. government designate 16 countries as CPCs. 10 of these countries already have been designated CPCs by the State Department: Burma, China, Eritrea, Iran, North Korea, Saudi Arabia, Sudan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan. USCIRF also recommends that 6 more be added. They are the Central African Republic, Nigeria, Pakistan, Russia, Syria, and Vietnam. Tier 2 countries, as I said, have some serious religious freedom violations, but they don't rise to the CPC standard. Tier 2 is purely a USCIRF list. There's no similar list in the State Department at this time. And it includes Afghanistan, Azerbaijan, Bahrain, Cuba, Egypt, India, Indonesia, Iraq, Kazakhstan, Laos, Malaysia, and Turkey. That brings me to a new aspect of this report. In December, the Frank R. Wolf International Religious Freedom Act tasked the State Department with designating non-state actors as entities of particular concern, EPCs, that violate religious freedom in a systematic way. In this report, USCIRF recommends 3 non-state actors for such designation for the first time. Non-state actors such as ISIS can at times be the most egregious violators of religious freedom. For purposes of this new designation, Congress has strictly defined such entities of particular concern as groups that exercise significant political power and territorial control, are outside the control of a sovereign government, and often employ violence in pursuit of their objectives. To be an EPC, they have to have all three of those characteristics. We therefore recommend that the Secretary of State designate three groups as EPCs: ISIS in Iraq and Syria, the Taliban in Afghanistan, and Al-Shabaab in Somalia. Now I turn to our Vice Chair, Commissioner Daniel Mark, to talk about some more specifics from the report.
Well, thank you very much, Chair Reese, and thank you very much, Mr. Gallagher. Thank you, of course, to everyone here who took the time to listen to us and to engage with us on this critical issue. In the United States, we sometimes refer to religious freedom as the first freedom, in part because it's the opening line of our Bill of Rights. And we are blessed in the United States for our freedom to believe or not believe. But this is a freedom denied to so many people around the world. We in America and elsewhere must appreciate our good fortune and be vigilant in the defense of this right for others. I think I speak for everyone on the Commission when I say that we believe that religious freedom is a fundamental human right, perhaps the fundamental human right, and should never be overlooked or relegated to second-tier status. All people have the right to freedom of religion or belief. All people in all places and at all times, to believe or not to believe. I want to highlight that this year, for the first time, we know this will be news, that we recommend Russia be designated a CPC. The Russian government has shown itself to be a systematic, ongoing, and egregious violator of religious freedom in the world. The United States, through the Department of State, needs to recognize this fact and send a clear message to Russia that we will not abide its continued campaign of attack and intimidation against freedom of religion or belief. We all saw the Russian Supreme Court decision last month, big news, I'm sure everyone here is familiar with it, that banned the legal existence of the witnesses in Russia. Through a cynical use of an extremely flawed set of anti-extremism laws, Russia has banned, for the first time in its history, an entire centrally administered religion. But let me stress that we were already on top of this and well aware of the problems developing there. This ruling was made after the Commission had already voted to recommend Russia as a CPC, and this was just one more extremely egregious example that supported our decision. The Russian Supreme Court ruling on the witnesses only confirmed that our recommendation was appropriate, justified, and timely. The Russian government's premeditated attack demonstrates that it does not consider itself bound by internationally recognized norms or conventions. A Russian Justice Ministry official reportedly described and preposterously described the witnesses as a threat to public order and public security. Given that the witnesses are known globally for their pacifism and avoidance of politics, that statement is simply absurd. For Tier 2, another change in our report, USCIRF includes Bahrain for the first time. That government's campaign against its majority Shia population intensified during the year, particularly including a significant increase in the number of arrests and unfounded charges against Shia clerics. Things are getting worse there, not better. I hope, however, that pursuant to our monitoring and notice of these problems, that I will be sitting here next year saying that the Bahraini government took decisive action to reverse this trend and a better year ahead. In our category of other countries and regions monitored, I would note that we have included Mexico for the first time. This may be surprising, but one reason for Mexico's inclusion is that a law meant to protect the autonomy of indigenous peoples' religious freedom has, ironically, been used to pressure followers of minority religions to convert and or practice the majority religion. USCIRF will watch to see how the application of this law and other factors affect religious freedom in Mexico. And again, I hope we can say next year that Mexico has taken the steps needed to fix this misguided application of a perhaps well-intended law. For several years, USCIRF has recommended that both Egypt and Iraq be designated CPCs for their particularly severe violations of religious freedom. This year, we do not recommend the CPC designation for those two countries. For Egypt, we see positive steps by the government of President al-Sisi with regard to engagement with minority communities, particularly Coptic Christians, the largest minority there, and specific actions and policies to improve conditions. We note, importantly, that we remain very disappointed at USCIRF that these positive steps have taken place against the backdrop of a dismal overall human rights record for the Sisi government and increasing attacks by ISIS-affiliated groups targeting religious minorities. A very bad situation with some positive developments on religious freedom. In Iraq, while the central government has tried to decrease sectarian tensions, ISIS, the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, continues to commit genocide and ruthlessly targets anyone who does not adhere to its barbaric, illiberal worldview. As noted above, we have recommended ISIS in both Iraq and Syria for designation as an EPC, an entity of particular concern, this year, the new category that Chair Reese just described. Though I wish our overall report could be more optimistic, I am hopeful that the U.S. can continue to play its unique role on this issue with partners around the world. And I would echo Chair Reese's call for a swift nomination and confirmation of an ambassador at large for international religious freedom. That issue is too important to wait. Thank you very much.
I'd now like to turn briefly to Commissioner John Ruskay for a description of USCIRF's new Religion Prisoners of Conscience project. After that, each commissioner will speak briefly about an aspect of the annual report or the Commission's work, as well as their Prisoners of Conscience project.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you for all that you do in defense of religious freedom in multiple settings over a long time. I also want to thank all of you for being here and acknowledge the presence of our extraordinary staff. Many of you know them, but they do incredible work on behalf of the mission of USCIRF. I'm delighted to introduce you to USCIRF's new initiative, the Religious Prisoners of Conscience Project. Our goal is to raise awareness by using and highlighting specific prisoners and speaking about their lives and what they've encountered and holding their pictures high. Our goal is to raise awareness of these prisoners through education, outreach, and advocacy on their behalf, and also to use that to highlight each country's laws and actions that has led to their imprisonment. Each commissioner has selected one, occasionally two prisoners to advocate on behalf of. These individuals have been jailed on what appear to so many to be trumped-up charges or no charges, or have simply disappeared. We seek their release. That's our goal. But what we've also been told by numerous prisoners, present and former, is that by raising their names, holding their pictures high, and highlighting their cases, these actions itself can have positive results for them. Silence isn't golden for religious prisoners of conscience or the issue of religious freedom. Silence is an enabler of repressive regimes. We at USCIRF are not going to be silenced. I'll ask each of my fellow commissioners briefly to say something about the prisoners they each have selected, as they all touch on different aspects of the annual report and the Commission's work over the past year. I'm advocating on behalf of Bajir Kazikanov, who was sentenced to 3.5 years in prison in Russia because he allegedly was, quote, organizing extremist activity, unquote. His real offense appears to be that he was a follower and teacher of Said Nursi, a well-known Islamic theologian, whose writings do not include and do not advocate hatred, violence, or the violation of human rights. He does not deserve to be in prison. Like all prisoners of conscience, he deserves to be released now. And that is our goal by highlighting these prisoners today and into the future. It's now my pleasure to turn it over to Commissioner Walcott to talk about the IPPFORRB.
You just gave it away.
And she can tell you what the acronym stands for, as well as the religious prisoner of conscience on whose behalf she is working. Commissioner Walcott.
Thank you, Commissioner Ruskay. I was given the task today to talk about, even for Washington, a pretty complicated, non-intuitive acronym, the IPPFORB, or what we in short call IPP. I'm particularly honored to be tasked with this today because we have we have the steering group, the core group of the IPP here in the room, parliamentarians from Norway, Brazil, Canada, and the United Kingdom. And would you mind standing up over there? We're just so happy to have you here. Oh. And also, Ed? Also, we should have Ed is a coordinator of the project that we've been working on, which I will talk a little bit about more now. As Commissioner Ruskay said, IPP-FORB stands for the International Panel of Parliamentarians for Freedom of Religion or Belief. This is an informal network of legislators committed to advancing freedom of religion for all. And working with this group from Brazil, Canada, Norway, Turkey. Turkey, I don't think that our Turkish representative, oh, he is here. I'm so sorry. Yes, indeed. Former parliamentarian from Turkey. USCIRF helped launch this network in 2014. And just for to tell you a little bit about what they've done, they have held major conferences, the last one in Berlin that was hosted by Chancellor Merkel, who spoke to the group. They have written joint letters from parliamentarians to various heads of state of countries on religious freedom issues. And very importantly, in the fall of last year, or August, a group of parliamentarians from different countries traveled to Burma together. And this was the first time we've done such a joint trip from parliamentarians from different countries, different religions, different parts of the world, different parties. And USCIRF was able, our very able staff was able to attend it and help out with that as well. Networks like the IPP, and there's nothing quite like it, but networks that are working on these religious freedom issues are key to making progress. I'm very proud of the role USCIRF has been able to play in the launch of the IPP and the work it's done since. And this steering group, core group of parliamentarians who we have here today have done amazing work on growing this effort, and there are now, what a few years ago was started with 5 or 6 parliamentarians, over 200 parliamentarians involved in this project, and it's spreading very rapidly. So we're very pleased to have you here today and to talk about this project. Turning to my religious prisoner of conscience that I adopted, mine are from Vietnam. Pastor Nguyen Con Chin and his wife, Tran Thi Hong, have been repeatedly harassed by the Vietnamese government, and the pastor is currently serving an 11-year jail term, which began in April of 2011. He was convicted of undermining national solidarity, is in poor health, has been physically and verbally abused while in prison, and denied his medicine. His wife isn't in prison, but she is constantly harassed by the government, including attempts to keep her from meeting with Ambassador David Saperstein, our colleague and former ambassador at large at the State Department, when he visited Vietnam last year. She finally was able to meet with him, but reported that she was physically abused afterward in a multi-day interrogation. It's really very simple. The Vietnamese government needs to release the pastor immediately and cease harassment of his wife. They should allow them to practice freely their faith and with no further threats to them or their 5 children. I'd like to turn over the mic now to my very dear colleague, Commissioner Jolly, who's going to talk about USCIRF's work on women and religious freedom and her religious prisoner of conscience. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you to each of you for joining us here today. We really appreciate your support. Women, particularly women in the developing world, face a daunting number of individual and collective violations to their equality and suffer severely in terms of their human rights, and for our purposes today, specifically in terms of their right to freedom of religion and belief. When we as a commission began this discussion, we began talking about child marriages, forced conversion, female genital mutilation, cutting, honor violence. The list of harmful practices to women around the world is a very long one. And it's also a primarily invisible one. So as we talked about this as a commission, we formulated this question: how could these gender-based inequities be given greater visibility and greater inclusion within the religious freedom conversation? And I'm very happy and very excited to let you know that within the next few weeks, we will be issuing a benchmark report on this nexus of women's equity and religious freedom. And our hope is to promote a conversation. We want to make a meaningful contribution to a deeper understanding of this issue and to maybe generate a larger consideration that being male is not being normative, that women's experiences within this issue are significantly different than those that we cover, presumably, which are almost exclusively male. So we're very happy to do that, and we hope that somehow this can maybe serve as an impetus or a model for looking at these two issues of women's equity and religious freedom as not being oppositional, but possibly being mutually affirming. And so we're very anxious to see where this conversation takes us. I would like to talk to you about two prisoners of conscience, my own, and that of Commissioner Tenzin Dorji, who couldn't be with us today. And both of these prisoners of conscience have something in common. They are both under the subjugation currently of the Chinese government. And so I'd like to begin with my woman that has kind of burrowed herself into my soul a little bit. At the age of 31, Gulmira Amin was sentenced to life in prison. Her crime? Advocacy for religious freedom and protection of her people, the Uyghur Muslims of the Xinjiang province in northwestern China. Gulmira's lifetime sentence included charges of leaking state secrets, organizing an illegal demonstration, and splitism, which is just essentially advocating for a separation from China. For months following her arrest, her family had no knowledge of her whereabouts or even if she was alive. And it wasn't until they happened to see a documentary film that they knew that Gulmira had been imprisoned. And we are calling upon the world to join us in asking the Chinese government to let Gulmira free, to let her live her life, and to advocate the injustice of this cruel act that has been perpetrated upon her and upon the other innocent Uyghur Muslims who find themselves imprisoned in China. Commissioner Tenzin and I see our prisoners of conscience as being generationally symbolic of this new generation in China who is now themselves being subjugated to this negative trajectory of human rights and religious freedom within the country. Tenzin has chosen, as his prisoner of conscience, the 11th Panchen Lama, a fitting choice being that Tenzin is the first Tibetan Buddhist to be part of the USCIRF Commission. And I'm going to go out on a limb and speak for all of us in saying, you know, we feel really privileged to serve here with Tenzin. As you are probably aware, the position of the Panchen Lama is the second highest in all of Tibetan Buddhism. 3 days after the 14th Dalai Lama selected him as the 11th Panchen Lama, Chinese authorities kidnapped this little 6-year-old boy and his family. No one has seen them since. The Chinese government sends glowing assurances about his well-being, but Tenzin would like to ask simply, if that is true, why can we not see him? Why can he not be returned to his people? Why can he not live the life he was born to live and accept the rightful place within his religious tradition? Last month was the Panchen Lama's 28th birthday, and Tenzin wrote a beautiful open letter in commemoration of that birthday and concluded with this statement. May you celebrate your 29th birthday and every birthday thereafter in freedom. Thank you, Tenzin. And I will turn the time over to Commissioner Cliff May, who will be talking about blasphemy and his own prisoner of conscience. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Jolly. I'm Cliff May, and I moonlight as president of the Foundation for Defense of Democracy's a national think tank that focuses on national security. I'm able to juggle more than one ball thanks to the very capable and dedicated staff that USCIRF has working full-time. USCIRF does indeed have a major blasphemy report coming out next month. I think some of the results may surprise you. Blasphemy laws basically say you can't insult or defame religion, or at least you can't insult or defame the official religion or the preferred religion of a particular country. And blasphemy laws seek to punish individuals who are thought to do so. We find such laws where you'd expect, but also where you wouldn't. For example, Canada, Denmark, and New Zealand, where these are on the books, though not implemented. When implemented, these laws are frequently used to stifle the expression of opinions that run counter to the majority views or religious belief system, or simply to the views of the regime in power. We've seen this recently and egregiously in Indonesia. An Indonesian court convicted the Christian governor of Jakarta of blasphemy last week and sentenced him to 2 years in prison. Now, just so you understand what it was he did that got him this conviction, he quoted from the Quran. He quoted from the Quran, a hadith about tolerance, while campaigning. But an edited version of his statement, omitting several key words, made it look like he was possibly questioning the Quran. And that quickly went viral. So what was truly shocking about the case was that the prosecutors, apparently understanding what had happened, they recommended dropping the charges, but the court refused. The court instead sentenced him to 2 years. This was clearly a case of using a law ostensibly intended to protect religion as a way to achieve political gains. As I think you realize, this also diminishes religion. My first prisoner of conscience is Mariam Nagash Zargaran, who is serving more than 4 years in prison in Iran. The charge, trumped-up charges, absolutely, of propagating against the Islamic regime and trying to harm national security. What she did was she worked in a Christian orphanage. As she is now sitting in the infamous Evin prison with a serious heart condition and other major health issues. She's been on hunger strikes while in prison, and at one point she was let out for medical treatment, but to show that the Iranian regime is as heartless as people believe, her sentence was lengthened to compensate for the time she was out of prison receiving medical treatment. She deserves better, and I'm working on behalf of her so she will be released as quickly as possible, and until then her prison, her jailers will improve her conditions and she'll receive the medical treatment she so vitally needs. My other prisoner is Raif Badawi. He's a blogger imprisoned in Saudi Arabia. Among his numerous punishments, 10 years in prison and 1,000 lashes, not to mention a $250,000 fine. What did he do? He ran a blog that encouraged debate on religious and political matters in Saudi Arabia. He has already received 50 lashes of the 1,000 to which he has been sentenced. Now that says something about the Saudi legal system, but he has also received the 2015 Sakharov Prize for his human rights work, which I think says something about the work he's attempting to do. The Saudi government, if it means what it says about becoming a nation that is not just rich, but is also admired, a nation that is a leader in the Middle East and beyond, absolutely should let him out and do so immediately. This is not complicated. Having said that, I'd like to turn it over, thank you very much, to Commissioner Arriaga to talk about the securitization of religious freedom issues and her two prisoners of conscience. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner May. Thank you, Commissioner. I'm pretty loud, but can you hear me in the back? I may not need the microphone. Thank you, Commissioner May, and thank you, Chairman Reese, for chairing this meeting. I recognize many of the faces in the room. All of you have devoted your life to a very noble cause, and that is defending people around the world and being a voice for those who are voiceless. I think we all agree that it is our birthright to live according to our deeply held convictions, and it is our duty to defend that right, not only for ourselves, but for others, particularly for those with whom we disagree. Our staff at the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom devote their entire career, their entire lives to defending that freedom. And we oftentimes get visitors from around the world that come to the Commission so we can have a dialogue. Last month, we met with Ahmed Shahid. He is a special rapporteur for religious freedom. He spoke very eloquently about the increasing secularization. Did I get it right?
Secularization, very well.
No, securitization, yes.
Securitization.
So, I wasn't drinking, I'm Cuban American, so there's
You're
some.
allowed to drink, I think.
Yeah, well, it depends. Some anglicized words are still difficult for me. But in essence, he talked about using security as an excuse to jail prisoners, jail individuals who are only exercising their birthright to live according to their deeply held convictions. And he spoke specifically about the fact that this has become a trend and it is extraordinarily dangerous, and we cannot allow that. We have already heard, for example, that in Bahrain there was a crackdown on Shia majority under the guise of national security. In Russia, we all know that the Jehovah's Witnesses, who are pacifists, who do not participate in government, have been deemed so dangerous that they have been banned from the country. And of course, we have also heard about the situation in Iran with the Baha'i. But I also want to talk a little bit about another group we met with last month. It was a group of Cuban pastors who came to meet with us to talk about the plight of religious people in Cuba. One of them, a young man, Felix Llerena Lopez, and I want to say his name because I think it's so important to name names. Felix Llerena Lopez, 20-year-old, bright-eyed, handsome young man who has become a Christian. No one in his family is a Christian. His parents are not Christians, his siblings are not Christians. All he wants to do is live according to his newfound faith and study history. Study history, that's it. So he came to this country, he had a 6-month visa. It was the first time he had left Cuba. And instead of staying here for the 6 months, he stays here for a few days, meets with people who can be informed about the plight of his fellow brethren in Cuba. As soon as he arrives to the airport, he is detained by the Ministry of Interior. The Ministry of Interior is the place where they torture people, a place that is infamous for holding captive people without their families knowing their whereabouts for months and sometimes years at a time. He's detained and he's given a date where he needs to show up. And all of his clothes are taken away, anything he brought in the United States, and he courageously shows up with that detention slip and goes in with his mother. His mother is dragged away, even though she had not been charged with anything. She's interrogated. She is threatened with a machete. She is told that maybe someone will think she's a terrorist and kill her on the street. And he is told that he has been kicked out of the university. This man has given up his future so others can live a life. And we owe him a debt of gratitude. I was extremely moved by him. Of course, I went home last night and I told my children at the kitchen table that we live in this incredibly great country of ours. We live in the freest country in the world, and it is our duty to raise our voice for those who don't have that same privilege. My prisoners of conscience are two Baha'i women, Fariba Kamalabadi and Mabash Sabet. I've been practicing saying that many more times than securitization, obviously. Sometimes it's hard when those names sound so foreign to think of them as really people who are just like you and me. They want to spend their birthdays with their family. They want to attend celebrations. They want their New Year's Eve to be surrounded by people who embrace them. And they want to attend their families' and relatives' funerals. They have been denied that right for over 9 years. Simply because they belong to a minority religion that's considered heretical by Iran. This is such a terrible crime. These women are a psychologist and a teacher. They are just like you and me. Mabash sent me this craft from prison, and she signed it here in gratitude. And I want to share it with you so that you too become a voice for her. Their terms are supposed to be up next year. All of the Baha'i 7, the other 5 individuals who with Mabash and Fariba were the leaders of the Baha'i Institute for Higher Education and have been sentenced, they should be released next year. They are so intrepid. The Baha'i Institute for Higher Education, which they created, has produced such great students that even though they were studying in the basements of people's houses and in the middle of the night their teachers were trying to photocopy things in photocopiers that have been smuggled, they have been accepted to universities all over the world, to Columbia University, to Oxford University. And they want their teachers, they want their leadership to be released. I hope that next year I will have a gift for Mabash. It won't be a craft because I'm crafty. I'm not crafty, but I think that it would be wonderful if they were able to come here and maybe we can have a gathering where you can meet them and thank them for their courage. Now I'll turn it over to our chairman and vice chairman who will talk about their prisoners. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Oriaga. I want to thank you and the other commissioners who mentioned our really outstanding staff, who I would like to acknowledge that. I was going to ask them to stand, but I see most of them are standing already. But those who aren't standing, please stand. I want to acknowledge the great work that you do. Thank you so much. We're almost to the Q&A set part of the this morning, so I'll be quick. My religious prisoner of conscience is the Eritrean patriarch Antonios. Like the Pacham Lama, he started his religious vocation at a very young age. He entered the monastery at 5 years of age. was ordained a deacon at 12 and a priest at 15. Like his father, he became a priest. So if there was ever a man born to the cloth, it certainly is the patriarch. But now, he is in detention somewhere in Eritrea. And at the age of 89, he is being held incommunicado. We don't know where he is, suffering from severe diabetes. What did he do to deserve this imprisonment? He called for the release of political prisoners and refused to excommunicate 3,000 parishioners who opposed the government. Like a good shepherd, he tried to protect his flock. And for that, he was detained and placed in detention with his whereabouts unknown. My goal is to advocate for his release until we succeed, and I ask for your support for his release too. This 89-year-old holy man who has just been treated so badly by his government. And now, Commissioner Mark.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chair Reese. I appreciate all of your patience and attention. I know we're going on, but there are a lot of important things we need to say. I'll be very brief. My two prisoners are being held in Burma. Pintfu Lat and Jaja Lat were arrested and sentenced for violating the Emergency Provisions Act for allegedly crossing the Burmese Indian border. They were also given additional 2-year sentences with hard labor under the Unlawful Associations Act, and that on the same day that the government granted amnesty to over 100 other prisoners. As Commissioner Arriaga said, this is another example of using security laws to crack down on those advocating for religious freedom. I don't know why I got security laws. They made you say securitization.
I know. Yeah, I'm going to bring this up afterwards with our wonderful staff.
To make matters
kidding.
worse, sorry, not a laughing matter here, of course, but to make matters worse, the Emergency Provisions Act, under which these innocent people were originally sentenced, has already been repealed, and yet they continue to serve a sentence under that act. Their sentences have not been reduced, and they have not been released. The Burmese government should release both of them immediately. And with that, I'll turn it back over to our moderator, Tom Gallagher, who will get things going with questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you everyone for the overview of the 2017 report and the new prisoners project. And I would just add one sentence on a personal note. I traveled to Iraqi Kurdistan last year to cover the displaced Christians and Yazidis. And one of the things that came up at every turn is that these displaced people didn't want to be forgotten. And so this annual report and the work of the Commission and the Prisoners Project guarantees that these good people will not be forgotten. I'm going to open it up for questions now. Remember, this is being taped, so we'd like you to wait for the microphone to be delivered. And as the moderator, I'm going to exercise a prerogative to ask the first question of Commissioner Jolly. As Vice Chairman Mark mentioned, USCIRF did not recommend for the first time in several years that Egypt be placed on the CPC list. Some people found this a little unusual, even odd, since the USCIRF report came out just weeks after the barbaric ISIS Palm Sunday bombing of the Coptic churches in Cairo. This past January, you traveled to Egypt as part of a USCIRF delegation, and you met with the Coptic Pope and other religious leaders. And USCIRF has continued to meet with the Coptic groups here in Washington, D.C. Could you comment briefly about moving Egypt on the Tier 2 list, as well as the situation of the Copts?
Yes, thank you. Can you all hear me at the back without, okay. Egypt. Egypt was a tough decision, really one of the toughest. And I think there's a couple of points of clarification that need to be made. First being that our designation covers a very specific period of time from February 2016 to February 2017. And our determination was made for those months, even though sometimes we reference things like the Russian banning of the Jehovah's Witnesses outside the time period. For purposes of the designation, we keep it within those months, and so the events that you cited came afterwards. Having said that, issues of religious freedom are a subset within the larger issue of human rights. And it is entirely possible that a country can be moving forward in terms of their addressing issues of religious freedom and at the same time be extremely problematic in terms of other human rights abuses. And this is the situation that we found in Egypt. The al-Sisi government has made very public and very symbolic gestures of engagement, particularly with the Coptic Church. And, the discussion is, well, that's just symbolism. But in a country like a country like Egypt, symbolism can be extremely powerful, especially when it's followed up by, like I say, further engagement with some of the religious minorities, restoring and repairing their churches, going to their worship services. That's meaningful. That's meaningful. And so we determined as a commission that these improvements, and I will say this also, that we met with a wide variety of government, religious, civil rights, civil society people, and everyone shared with us their feeling that the needle had moved in their direction. And so we felt like this needed to be encouraged and needed to be recognized. And are there serious issues of religious freedom? Yes, there are. But we felt, in looking at the documents, looking at our experience, that Egypt no longer fit in the IRFA definition of CPC.
Thank you, Commissioner Jolly. So open up for questions. We have one here. We'll start here in the middle, and then we'll come back to you, and we'll circle through.
Hello, Nathan Weininger with the 21st Century Wilberforce Initiative. Yesterday, according to the readout from the White House on President Trump's meeting with the president of Turkey, he raised the Andrew Brunson case, a prisoner of conscience, American prisoner of conscience in Turkey. And I'm just wondering, how would you like to see the administration engage further on other prisoners of conscience issues?
Commissioner Reese, do you want to take that? Or do you want it directed to anyone in particular? So whoever would like to take it.
We were actually just talking about this yesterday when we met with the representatives IPP and the steering committee. That particular prisoner was mentioned, and I thought one of the good, and as you heard from the excellent introductions, that one of the members is a former parliamentarian of Turkey now with Commissioner May's FDD. And I thought one of the most powerful things they shared with us, which of course is a sentiment we have, is the first thing is to always mention them. Like it need that to be vigilant about bringing every time there's one of the members of the steering committee said to us, I hope you don't mind that I'm mentioning something you guys said, but I thought it was such an important and powerful line, that every time the U.S. engages, whatever it's about, have to put in a word for the prisoner of conscience. Mention the prisoner by name whenever possible, mention religious freedom by name whenever possible, and that's always a positive first step, is making sure that no matter what we're talking to them about, that we know that we haven't forgotten and that we mind. And that would be, I think, a huge step forward if the administration, all of their bilateral discussions, they just always mention it as a starting point.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. My name is Faisal Foulad. I'm Secretary General Bahrain Human Rights Watch Society. My question to Vice Chairman Mr. Daniel. Our report, annual report 2017 regarding religion in Bahrain, some difference between your report and our report. Our report is welcome the religion in Bahrain when your report is putting Bahrain on tier 2. We said the minorities' religion rights in Bahrain is appreciated. The Christian, Jewish, Baha'i, everybody is practice their rights. When your reports, no one mentioned it. The majority, which you said, the Shia, we, in our report, we said migrant worker is the majority. And they practice their rights very fair, very transparency. So why the different? Thank you.
Yes, well, thank you very much for the question, and surely for the good work you do in your report as well. The first thing to say, of course, is that there are going to be differences of opinion and these subjective judgments. I mean, the placements of countries are, as much art as they are science. But the bottom line is, we've never had Bahrain on tier 2 before, and our outstanding staff, that follows this on a daily basis, made to us a very powerful case that the crackdown that's been seen this year, specifically in 2016, is really worse than what we've had before, and bad enough and troubling enough that we wanted to make note of it and make the notice quite public, as we have, and we hope that that the Bahraini government and organizations like yours can say to us next year, you put us on tier 2 next year, we didn't agree with you then, we think this was unfounded, and look at our record from 2017. What could you hold against us? And we'll all be happy and we'll all be in agreement, and I think that's what we're trying to accomplish. Thank you.
Thank you. Question right here. You'll be next. We'll go right here.
Thank you, Jay Kansar from the Hindu American Foundation. Commissioners, I wanted to ask about Bangladesh. It's on the monitored list at the moment, and I wanted to know, and I think it's there the second year in a row. Why is it on in that particular category as opposed to a higher category when bloggers continue to be murdered in the streets with impunity? I think a U.S. Embassy employee in the past year has also been killed by radical extremists, and the perpetrators have not been brought to justice as of yet by the government. And Hindu priests continue to be murdered inside their temple quarters, and religious minorities are subjugated.
Just to the question.
So this list is quite extensive and it's quite well known. So we wanted to ask as to why.
Father Tom?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for that question. Oops, I'm sorry. Yeah. Thank you for that question and bringing up the case of Bangladesh. This is a country that we are going to continue to keep an eye on. We're very concerned about the treatment of Hindus there and also in Pakistan. In fact, Commissioner Mark and I just came back from Pakistan, where we met with a number of Hindu leaders, including Ramesh Vakawani, a parliamentarian who updated us on his work getting Hindu marriages recognized by the Pakistani government. Really extremely important work in protecting the rights and the families of Hindus in Pakistan. We also met with another Hindu who's the founding member of the Pakistan Council on World Religion, who told us about his work in interreligious dialogue and briefed us on the situation of Hindus in Pakistan. So in both Pakistan and in Bangladesh, we are monitoring this situation and keeping an eye on it, and any information you can bring to us on the situation there, we're happy to consider.
Thank you. We're going to go to the question here in the fourth row, and then we'll come back to the first row.
Yes, thank you. I'm Professor Thomas Johnson, Religious Freedom Ambassador for the World Evangelical Alliance. I'm delighted to see that you're developing the terminology of entities of particular concern. There's one other category I would like to ask about. In what we're hearing from some of our sources is that organized crime is sometimes playing a major factor in religious persecution. I think we're hearing that from Mexico. Also, we're hearing about corruption playing a factor in religious persecution. Is there any way that you are able to address those sorts of issues as causes of persecution in the terminology and analysis that you are using? Thank you.
Who would like to take that?
I think I'm going to just simply say that you raise a very interesting issue. In my other job, my day job, one of the things we've been looking at is the increasing cooperation and collaboration between jihadist groups and organized crime, and of all places, Latin America, for example. What I would encourage is that we stay in touch with you and try to learn more about this nexus, because I don't think we know enough about it. I think an important thing to say this morning is that a big part of the job of the commissioners is to learn, is to listen, is to understand more. We're trying to monitor a lot of countries in the world and be updated on them. At the end of the day, a lot of our calls are judgment calls, but the more we know and the more and the more diverse the input we have, the better informed we'll be and the more useful will be our work.
I think, too, you're raising a very good question, which is, forces us to think about what are the prerequisites for religious freedom. When you have a situation where the political leadership and the police are corrupt, and then you have sectarian strife, the minority religions are usually going to get the short end of the stick. You need a rule of law. You need to deal with corruption. And I think all of us who are involved in supporting religious freedom have to remember that, these are things we have to be concerned about also, because without it, it's very difficult to support, to have the conditions necessary to really have religious freedom flourish. So thank you for raising that.
And to the first row, this gentleman.
Hello, everyone. My name is Matthew Bolger, and I'm the Legislative Director with the American Humanists Association. First off, thank you all for your fantastic work, as well as the work of your staff. Two-part question. Commissioner May, you teased us very briefly with the blasphemy report that's going to be coming out in a month. Could you speak at all more towards that, or is that something that, unfortunately, you have to keep under wraps? The second question would be, what exactly would be required for Bangladesh to be considered a Tier 2 or CPC country? Echoing what Jay Kansar just said, the atrocious murders of atheist bloggers, as well as the systematic repression of religious minorities and the government's permissiveness towards non-state actors who carry out violence. What exactly is required to get them up to a higher level of designation?
I don't think I want to talk much more about the blasphemy report at this time, partly in the interest of time and partly because we want to save that for that. But let me mention another name, if I may, Asia Bibi, who in Pakistan, as you may know, is a Christian woman who is accused of insulting Islam and has been put in prison for a very long time. The governor of Punjab defended her, attacked blasphemy laws. He was subsequently assassinated by his own bodyguard, and this has played out for some time. So this is a serious concern, blasphemy laws, in terms of oppression of people on the basis of religious freedom that we're going to look at. Go ahead. Yes, please.
Just to add one word on the report, just tease a little. It really is a first of its kind study. It's an attempt, to the best of the ability of the researchers, of course, there are limitations, to do a worldwide survey, really, to take into account all the blasphemy laws. And some of the countries where they found blasphemy laws, like you heard originally, were really surprising. But there's like any study, there are limitations, but it really has really sheds light on this issue that's very important to us in a way that I think just hasn't been done before in terms of the scope of the examination. So that itself will be a great contribution.
Thank you. And then,
do you want, on the Bangladesh part?
yeah, you want to? Okay, sorry.
Well, I mean, I think the second part in terms of Bangladesh, look, it is at the end of the day a judgment call. We need to look at the evidence. We need to weigh the evidence. We need to try to see not only what is happening, but what the government's response is. The government, as has been pointed out, it's not simply a matter of the government, whether the government is active in this type of repression, but is it tolerating religious oppression? Is it looking the other way? So I do think in answer to your question, Jays, we welcome further evidence and to know more. It is helpful when we can go to these countries, but that's not everything either. You don't see everything on a short visit. We do get that.
Thank you.
I also want to echo our gratitude. My name is Ilhan Kagri from the Muslim Public Affairs Council. Can everybody hear me? Two quick questions. One is, has USCIRF or the State Department Office of Religious Freedom recommended to President Trump or his delegation to bring up the issue of Raif Badawi on his visit to Saudi Arabia? And then the second question is, I know that the designation, the CPC designation, does have some, kick to it in terms of government regulations, in terms of trade and agreements with those countries. If you could please really quickly give a couple of those and then explain if Saudi Arabia gets a waiver or pass on some of those.
Thank you.
You can take it.
Well, I don't.
Yeah, all right. Well, I'll answer very quickly. And we are recommending that President Trump bring up this case, the case of Badawi, when he gets to Saudi Arabia. That's absolutely true. And you're also correct that even when we make a recommendation of a CPC country or in State Department designates, there usually is the ability for a presidential waiver in the national security interest, and that often is exercised. And we are often critical of that, and we have a right to be critical because we're an independent agency. We understand there are various equities that the President and the State Department will want to balance. But part of the reason we exist is to give greater emphasis to religious freedom as what we see as that's what I certainly see, and I think most of the commissioners agree, as a basic freedom, a necessary first freedom in order for other freedoms to flourish. And without freedoms, I think people's lives are diminished.
I just wanted to add a word about that, and I thank you really for your question, because I think this highlights a place where everyone in this room has an important role to play. Just to give you a very short synopsis, it's a lot of like inside the Beltway thing, but what it means for a country to actually suffer the consequences is, first we make the recommendation, then the State Department has to agree with us, and as you know, they only agree with us about half the time if you look at, for example, a comparison from last year. Once they agree with us and make the designation, Secretary of State has been delegated that authority by the President, then the administration has to select what action it's going to take under the CPC, which could range all the way from something more serious like sanctions down to lower level diplomatic reproaches and that sort of thing. But even when there's sanctions, in almost all the cases we have, the sanctions are what Washington calls double-hatted. So they just attach the religious freedom sanctions name to sanctions that are already in place on that. There's no additional sanctions. And then even after all of that, right, then the president, even if they accept it, and I think the president can still issue a waiver and have no penalty or no action taken at all. So there's so many steps along the way, and to the extent that everyone in this room helps to amplify our voice by some of you may lobby, and some of you have connection on other kinds of things, and the journalists certainly who have the bully pulpit of the media, all of those things together help give our recommendations some bite when people who are elected officials have to make decisions about what to do with our recommendations.
If I may, can I just add a word? I think it's an excellent question, and I want to just encourage, in addition, we're dealing with prisoners of conscience at the very individual level, countries, asking of impact on policy. But part of what this is about is elevating the entire issue of religious freedom as a human right. And think about it. The very fact that you're here, focused on providing information, etc., the International Parliamentarian Group, which was here, which now numbers, we learned yesterday, over 150. This did not exist. So in multiple ways, journalists, NGOs, government offices, this commission, etc., our broad agenda is to elevate the issue from the individual to impact on policy. And as Commissioner Marks said, there's a role for all of us in this, and that's why your presence, your questions, so we can continue to learn. It is a huge honor to be on the commission, a bipartisan one, which we have many differences. We share a deep commitment, but huge learning is required. We have a fabulous staff of 15. This is a big job, and it's a lot of terrain. So we welcome your input on this, and keep it coming.
Well said. We'll have a question here from.
I'm sorry, if I could just add one other footnote to this. I think that your question shows the need to develop new tools for pushing religious freedom. The fact that sanctions are so frequently waived begins to make you wonder what use are they. In addition, there are some people who are concerned that certain sanctions are more harmful to the people than they are to the regime. We now have some new tools that we can use in our quest for religious freedom, and that is the targeting of individuals for sanctions, denying them visas, freezing their assets in the United States. We need to do a lot more work in that area, and that's something that we need your help in doing, because we need names and we need evidence in order that we can get these people listed and penalized. When they suddenly find out they can't come to New York to go shopping, maybe they'll change their attitudes, and and that's a lot easier, I think, for our government to do than impose sanctions on an entire country. So this is something that we're going to be looking at in the coming year, and any help that you can give us in this area, I think, could be tremendously helpful.
Thank you. And Kim?
Hi, I'm Kim Lawton of Religion and Ethics News Weekly. A question for Commissioner Reese. You mentioned concern about an appointment for an ambassador for international religious freedom. Could you say a little more about that, and also what specific steps your commission will be looking for from the Trump administration that would signal that it is indeed making concerns about this issue?
Yeah. Well, the position of the ambassador for international religious freedom is extremely important. This is the point person in the State Department that keeps reminding everybody in the State Department that religious freedom is an important issue and should be a priority in our foreign policy, and that whenever a delegation goes and visits another country, the issue of religious freedom should be part of the agenda. It should not be buried underneath the issues of national security and trade and forgotten about. Or as they're walking out the door, you should do something on religious freedom. No, it should have real emphasis. And we need a strong voice in the State Department in the role of the ambassador for religious freedom to do that. So that's extremely important. We were very happy with the work of David Saperstein. I think most of you know him and his record and his talent and his ability to push this issue. He did an extremely good job. If we could clone him and put him right back into the office, we would be very happy. What are we recommending to the Trump administration? Well, it's right here. We're sending this over to the State Department, to the White House, with our recommendations on religious freedom and the issues that they need to bring up in every one of these countries, especially the CPC countries, the countries that we recommend be CPCs. We want the Trump administration to make religious freedom an issue, a priority in its foreign policy. Our foreign policy should not simply be about U.S. self-interest, national security and trade. It should also be about the ideals, the values for which this country is known. We also believe that promoting religious freedom around the world is in our national self-interest too, because we believe it brings about more peaceful societies where there's more tolerance and stability and peace, which is very good for national security. It's also good for business. So there's all sorts of reasons not to ignore religious freedom as an important foreign policy issue, and we hope that the Trump administration will make that point. I guess, well, I'll say it. I probably shouldn't, but that's never stopped me before. I guess I would encourage all those religious people, especially evangelicals, who voted for Mr. Trump, to tell him that this is their issue. This is something that's important to them. And they don't want him to forget about it now that he's president.
Well, thank you. You sort of said part of what I planned to say. All of you in the room also, I mean, for all your interest in this issue, it would be great, not just the evangelicals, to encourage the White House, not only on the ambassador at large position, but we have a vacancy open on our commission as of Sunday. We have one more commissioner. Hopefully we'll get somebody soon, and we have encouraged it in every way we know how. And of course, there's a lot of newspaper articles on how behind they are on, I shouldn't probably say that, but how there are so many jobs to fill. And so we are just in there trying to compete. And I think the president has made many statements that indicate he has a great interest in religious freedom and concern about Christians in the Middle East and so forth. So I'm personally keeping my fingers crossed that we'll get some appointments sooner than later. Thanks.
Hello. Hi there, my name is Rose Johanna. I'm a recent graduate from American University. As an Assyrian American, I was kind of puzzled to see Iraq drop down to a tier 2 state. I'm sure, as is the case with Bangladesh, I'm sure that this was not done without a great amount of care and consideration. But having briefly flipped through your report, I was not able to see any sort of concrete evidence of the Iraqi government, or the Kurdish regional government for that matter, making any steps or taking any sort of initiatives to address the issues that Yazidis and Christians face in Iraq, especially considering the 2016 prohibition on the consumption of alcohol, which not only, I mean, it sounds benign, but it actually economically disenfranchises an entire religious group, Christians who actually own and operate liquor stores. Could somebody I cannot direct this to anybody, I'm not sure who has the most expertise on this, but could somebody explain what sort of steps the Iraqi government has taken to warrant a drop down, if you will, to tier 2? Thank you.
Well, I appreciate your question, and I think you make some good points. A lot of the times what we're trying to do here is not just judge whether the glass is half empty or half full, but is it filling or leaking at this point. And I think this decision was based on a belief, which I think we're going to need to re-examine, that the Iraqi government and that the Kurdish authorities, who are fairly autonomous, do recognize the problem and are attempting in a serious way to address it. That said, I also want to just point out that one of the priorities of the Commission as of last year is the genocide taking place in the Middle East now, particularly of Christians, Yazidis, and some other religious minorities, including Shias in predominantly Sunni areas of Syria. I think we would all argue that there is nothing more final or lethal in terms of religious oppression than extinction, than genocide. And we feel that neither the previous administration nor yet this administration is addressing this seriously enough. We think there's a lot more that this commission needs to do to highlight this more than tragedy, this atrocity. After 2,000 years, people living in the place where Christianity first arose, the idea that within a generation they may be totally wiped out in this area, wiped off the map, is something that I think, by the way, that the media has not, for the most part, taken nearly seriously enough. This is a story that, after 2,000 years, this story could not be more significant. So I appreciate your concerns. I think we share your concerns, and we want to learn more. And again, these are always moving targets.
Thank you.
May I add something?
Sure.
We talked about Bangladesh. We talked about Egypt. We talked about moving. No one on this list is a good guy. I mean, these are, yeah. So I think that and we take this extraordinarily seriously. I mean, you will see something extraordinary and miraculous happens once a month in this building, and that is that we all come from different faith traditions. We were appointed by different parties, and yet we have unanimously voted to approve each and single one of these country reports, because we have this expert staff that's giving us information. We're traveling to these countries. We're meeting with people. As Commissioner May said, of course, we're here to learn, but everyone in this report is there for a reason, and we will continue evaluating what happens in those countries.
Thank you. Now the question in the back, please. Yes.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Sir, this is Jahanzeb Ali. I'm the Washington correspondent for the Airway News TV Pakistan. You just talk about a little bit about the Pakistan blasphemy laws and others. But as you know, that situation of religious freedom in both Pakistan and India is very concerning. The Shias, Ahmadis, Christians, Hindus are being killed in Pakistan on a regular basis, while if you see in India, the Muslims are being killed for eating beef, the cow meat. It's happening for the last 2 years. So what kind of recommendations you have included in this annual report for these two countries? Thank you.
Well, as far as what recommendations, I would just, for the sake of publicity, encourage you to take a look real carefully at our country chapters and the beautiful new formatting that highlights the recommendations there. I do want to say, first of all, you ask a very good question. I do want to say that it is not the Commission's view that India and Pakistan are in the same exact basket here. There are definitely problems in both countries, but there's a reason why we have Pakistan as a strong and persistent CPC recommendation and not India. So without adopting that the comparison, I do want to say that Father Tom, Chair Reese, and I were both in Pakistan together this month, and we took, of course, a hard look at the blasphemy law, which we've been following all along. And our first recommendation, you asked what recommendation do we make? Well, the first thing is that the blasphemy law should be repealed, plain and simple. All the blasphemy laws from start to finish are in one way or another a violation of Article 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and in practice are used to violate the religious freedom of believers and non-believers, for sure. Now, we know, though I will never stop saying they should repeal it, that repeal of that law is not imminent. And so the next set of recommendations that we have is greater enforcement and implementation, but also perhaps addition of due process protections. Part of the problem is that the lack of protection for people being accused of blasphemy, and then the lack of prosecution of people who engage in vigilante mob violence against people accused has created this climate of impunity that has worsened things very severely. One of the cases we talked about a lot on a trip to Pakistan is one of a Muslim university student lynched at the university, right, which exploded the narrative that this is targets only religious minorities, or it only takes place among the uneducated. And so we know that the climate of impunity has gotten really, really bad. And so a very first step for the government is certainly, and this is true, this is something, Chair Reese talked about, problems with corruption and rule of law. A step that so many countries can take is make sure that due process is being held up, the rule of law, so at least people who are accused and all these spurious accusations that they are, even if they're detained, that they are protected by the police and not subject to mob violence, that they have access to lawyers and fair trials and are allowed out on bail and all the things that a normal person accused. And again, not everybody should go up with some really spurious accusations, or people should never be detained. I want to be clear about that. But even when they are, the rule of law is so important to ensure that people have a fair hearing, even before we get the substantive laws changed that are the real root of the problem.
I'd like to just make one comment, because Pakistan is a country that I've followed for more than 30 years now. And as you well know, it was conceived as a secular country, a country that would be very tolerant of its minority populations, of Hindus, Sikhs, of Ahmadis, of Christians, of Shia. This vision that Muhammad Ali Jinnah had of this country has been disappointed, I would say. At birth, Pakistan had 30% minority population. It's now down to 3%. And that 3% is sorely oppressed every single day. And it's disappointing. And the last time I was in Pakistan and I spoke on these issues at university, a lot of people, I think what I said resonated with a lot of people, but I also had a shoe thrown at my head. So, so Pakistan remains, what's that?
You're in good company.
Yeah, good company. Happily that has not happened yet today. Anyhow, this is a very serious concern I have.
So I'd like to thank all of you for attending today. I'd like to thank the commissioners. People don't realize how much work the commissioners put into this role. And the report, the Prisoner Project, give me hope. I think it should give everyone hope. And as a number of the commissioners said, we're in this together. We all have a role to play. And we give hope, most importantly, to those who are suffering around the world due to their beliefs. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Very good.
Very good. Very good.